I hope you noticed at the end of that last video that I was going in and spending some time just trying to tweak those parameters to get the sound to be very memorable and not so generic. And so for a professional production, I would easily spend 5, 10 minutes just tweaking ever so slightly to try to get that sound to really fit, to really pop through, to be something that I personally would find memorable. If I was listening to the track, I would remember that sound. And sometimes that processing is going to be very subtle, and sometimes it will be quite extreme. And if you're not familiar with all of the controls and the parameters of the plugins you're using and how it shapes the sound, you really need to get familiar with that. Otherwise, you'll end up having to spend 30, 40, 50 minutes of doing what I was just doing there at the end of the last video. But I just also wanted to give you guys a word of caution, especially when it comes to spatial processing. If you have sounds and you're processing them in solo, so not in context with the other music that's going on in your track, a long reverb tail is always going to sound good. It just always does. It doesn't matter what the sound is. I think we all love that particular kind of decaying, smooth sound of a reverb that you get with some of these processors. But the thing is, you can't put that on every sound. Otherwise, you're going to end up washing out the track. And I personally like really washy, super wet tracks, but most people don't. Most people are going to say this isn't clear enough. We're not hearing distinction between the different instruments. And this is why you have to exercise caution and really ask yourself, what role is any particular sound playing in the context of the full track? So there might be 2 or 3 examples where having a long reverb tail is really going to work. And then for the other tracks, maybe you put on a dimension expander on one thing, and then maybe you have a short reverb tail from the tall reverb on another, and then you have maybe a medium tail from the Boogex that's been filtered and processed further. And it's okay to have a reverb on every single instrument track. A lot of people might tell you otherwise, and the reason they would tell you otherwise and maybe set it up with a lot of send and return tracks, which we'll get into next week, was because of like a DSP concern. And yes, if your DSP is spiking out, you're not going to be able to put reverbs on every single track. But for me, and for what I listen to when I'm listening to professionally produced music, is almost always the spatial component. So what are they doing with delays? What are they doing with reverbs? Are they putting on anything special, like say a dimension expander? Is the chorus being used to widen this sound? How are they getting that result for each sound, and what role is it playing? And the more you listen and the closer you listen, you're going to find that the spatial effects are oftentimes the X factor in a sound. So most producers, and the producers you probably look up to, they'll tell you what instruments they're using. They'll say what synthesizers they're using, and they might even give you the preset that they used. But then the issue is, why does that preset not sound like what I'm hearing on the record? And that almost always comes down to then the processing that's gone on afterwards. So a lot of times it's the spatial processing, or it could just be, generic effect processing, but definitely spend the time, think about the sounds, think about the role they're playing, and ask yourself, how generic do I want this sound to be, or how memorable do I want this sound to be? And if you have a lead sound, and that's the thing that you want the person to remember after having gone through and listened to the full track, you need to spend more time on it and more time effect processing. So I hope you guys have fun with that. I can't wait to hear the sort of stuff that you're able to come up with.